So we're going to have an update on pavement management today. I think the engineering team has done a great job on this, and it's good for the commissioners to live and learn a little bit and look at our assets worth $1 billion and a lot of miles. But I'm really pleased that we have a plan, what people want to do. So Brenda, do you want to take our...
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for taking the time today to discuss our city's pavement management system. Today, we will be discussing our pavement preservation and kind of just be sticking to that preservation aspect of pavement. Today, Kevin Gorder and Tom Knockmoose will be doing our presentation, and thank you for taking the time.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. As promised, we're here to update you guys on our pavement condition index, our score of our pavement, kind of our report card, if you will. As an engineer, it's kind of fun to get into this. We get a raw data. It's 87 columns, and there's 5,600 rows of data. And we try to process this all together for you guys so we can make it easily understandable, and that's gonna be our goal. So it's a very technical presentation today. So please stop us and ask questions as you need to as we start talking about some of these technical side of things. Do want to emphasize this is for the pavement only. We're not talking about storm sewer. We're not talking about sanitary sewer. We're not talking about water mains, signals, lighting. It's strictly our pavement that we drive on. So just keep that in mind as we're presenting this. We're going to go through some common terminologies. We're going to review our pavement network. We're going to highlight the pavement management data collection process, and then start reviewing and comparing our recent pavement survey results. Then we're going to get into a lot of pavement preservation strategies to try to how do we work to preserve the system, the current condition of the network, and then some funding informational stuff for you guys, and then some ideas we have for the roadmap into the future. So terminology, we're going to start with that, and terminology really, if you hear us talk about a lane mile, that's one lane of traffic or one lane of roadway a mile long. So basically 12 foot wide, a mile long. Center line miles, now that is the whole road. So if you have a 2-lane road, each lane mile then is two lane roadway is 1 center line mile. A 6-lane roadway is 1 center line mile. So different terminology there. Surface types, we have asphalt roadways. That's just a little over half of our system. We have concrete, which is the other large portion of our system. And then we're going to talk about a composite pavement section. That in our city, typically that's an old concrete roadway with an asphalt overlay. So it looks like an asphalt road, but it really has concrete underneath it. We're also going to talk about Icon today. And Icon is just really a computer software program that we use to process all of this data to put it in a format that you guys can see and hopefully understand. And then pavement condition index, that's the score. That's 0 to 100, with 100 being perfect, 0 being basically done. And as I say that, 32nd Avenue in August of 21 was a 63 between 25th and 27th Street. So, 0 is a long ways down. And then just a note on standardization. ASTM is this national standard, 6433. It's a national standard for how we rate this. So they take and look at the distresses, and we look at all the ride and all those things in the ASTM. So we can get a standardization so we can compare one to another. More terminology as we get into this. We have arterials, and those are the section line roads. They're our large roads built to carry a lot of traffic in a very safe manner. The collectors are kind of going through the neighborhoods or through the business districts to kind of get traffic from all the area in there to the arterials. And then of course the local ones are bringing the traffic from your house to the collector to the arterial. So that's kind of the hierarchy we're going to talk about today. Fargo's pavement network, it's about 1,400 lane miles of pavement. So you can drive across North Dakota 4 times with the pavement network we have in town, or it's a 4-lane road from here to Montana, whichever way you want to look at it. In the last 15 years or so, the network has grown by almost 400 lane miles. So as the city is growing, we're adding lane miles. So we've seen about a 40% increase in our roadway miles, lane miles since 2006. So if you were to look at this map, and it's not the best map, but I'll try to describe it. This is the city of Fargo. It's outlined in the purple color, and it's overlaid over Minneapolis. So the north end of that purple figure is 694.94. The south edge is 494 down in Bloomington, going from 77 by the Mall of America all the way out to Highway 100. So that's kind of gives you a scale of how big Fargo is compared to the Minneapolis Metro. And the mayor has mentioned it, but if you were to replace all the pavement in our system, just the pavement, it would be about $1.2 billion to replace it. So we have a significant investment in our pavements. So our pavement network, just kind of breaking it down a little bit, I talked about the different types of pavement. Concrete is 41% of our network. Asphalt is 55%, and then that composite makes up about 4% of our pavement network. Looking at classifications, we threw alleys in here. This is the only time we'll talk about alleys. It's really a small part of our network, not really part of the actual day-to-day work that the engineering department does. It's a adjacent property owner issue, so we just wanted to show that little sliver, but based on square yards, 31% of our network is arterial, 52% is local, and then the rest of it's the 14% is the collector. So it's a lot of arterials, but arterials are typically wider, so the square yards count up on them. So if you have a 6-lane road, you're counting a lot of width, so you have a lot of square yards, versus a local road that might be 28 or 32 feet wide. So the square yards is how this graph is showing by square yards, not by lane miles, not by center line miles. So how do we do this? So we do a full survey every 4 years where we actually go out and collect the data. And the last time we collected here in 2021 was Stantec was our consultant. They started collection around August of 21. They sent the raw data to us in December, and we've been processing it since December through ICON and then ASTM, all the things that we use to get the data. So this specialized vehicle, and it's just a van that drives around our streets, and you may have seen the video that our communications department put together about the van that they use to collect that. So they have lasers that can measure the width, depth, and length of cracks and how extensive the cracking is. They can measure rut depth, that wheel depression on a roadway as it gets constant traffic. And then arterials and collectors are collected in 2 passes. So we do a pass in each direction, if you will, but we do our local roads just in 1 pass, just one kind of pick a lane and try to collect that data. It's just an effort to speed up the process and make it a little more affordable, and we can still get a really good measure of how those local roads are performing. And then we do take pictures of the right-of-way every 25 feet, so we can kind of see what the right-of-way looks like, and we can pull those up in our GIS program if we want to look at it and see what the pavement actually looked like. So moving forward, this pavement condition index, and if you want to think of that as a report card, just kind of think about grading a roadway. We take 20 distresses on asphalt, 19 in concrete. We enter that raw data into ICON, and that's here's kind of how this all lays out. So you have distress type, whether it's cracking or rutting or surface failures, how much of the distress there is, and how bad is the distress. You take those 3 things, you put it into a pavement condition index, and it comes out as a score. So you can see there, it's kind of, if you start at 100, it's kind of like 15-point blocks working backwards to the bottom. So that is the numbers, and as you can see, if we in the green boxes, our network declined just about 4 points over 4 years. So not alarming. It's telling us that we have to kind of take an opportunity to look at our pavement that we have and how do we preserve that? How do we keep it where we want it? We feel like this is the numbers are pretty good, but the trend is down, and that's the thing we want to address at this point. If you want to think about it from a report card, we went from a low B to a high C. So that's really what we kind of did here, is if you want to look at it from a grading system on a school system. So before we get to talk about the kind of the meat of the presentation with the pavement preservation, pavement management, just want to talk about pavement, the backlog. The backlog is the pavement that has a score of 40 or less. So it's the pavements that are really deteriorated. And these are the pavements that pavement preservation really isn't a good strategy. They're too far gone. You're going to put some money on there. It's not going to last. So these are the roads that are waiting for reconstruction. So you can see here, as we get into this, we have about a 4.5% backlog. Anything under 10% is pretty manageable from a standpoint of reconstruction and keeping your system in a good condition as you move forward. If you start to defer the pavement preservation, the rest of the pavement will degrade or decline into that category, and that's what you don't want to do. You want to try to keep it in those higher categories as with the strategies we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. And then when backlog gets too large, to reconstruct all your streets consumes substantial portions of your money, and you just can't, pretty soon you're not doing any preventative maintenance. So it really gets to be where you're kind of exhausted your opportunities to save payments, you're just rebuilding payments. So with that, I'll let Tom talk about the meat.
Good afternoon. So Kevin gave us a lot of background, so now we'll talk a little bit about how we maintain our roadways and why we do so. So you'll hear the terms preventative maintenance and pavement preservation probably used kind of interchangeably today. But really what it is just a proactive approach that implements a series of low-cost preventative maintenance treatments. And the aim of that is just to preserve our roadways. So ultimately why we do this is it saves the city and our taxpayers money by extending the life of that pavement. So this is probably what you would see on a roadway if we do no maintenance on it. So this is just plotting the PCI score on an annual basis. And so if the initial cost to construct was $135 per square yard, the life of the pavement absolute failed at year 28. We're spending about $4.82 per square yard per year. But if we do preventative maintenance on this roadway, so for a strategy of a seal coat at about year 2, and then about 8 years later do another seal coat, about 25 years after the initial investment in the roadway do a mill and overlay, you can see that we've extended the life of that pavement by about 16 years. So granted, we had some additional costs when doing so, but ultimately what we've done is brought down the cost to maintain that road, to own that road over the life of that roadway. So here's how we do that. For asphalt roadways, we do have a fairly robust program. So we'll do crack sealing. That's typically performed in areas where we're doing a chip seal. And then if we have additional budget, we'll go beyond those. We also do chip seals, typically done about every 8 years. Mill and overlays, it'll really depend on the type of road and how that roadway was likely built at the time that we built it. So arterials, we're probably seeing every 12 to 15 years, and that's just because they have a lot of traffic on them. Collectors probably in 15 to 20 years, and locals 15 to 25 years. And so what I'd say with that, a local roadway that was built maybe in the 80s, when our strategy was to maybe use minimal amount of gravel, no drain tile, no geotextile fabrics or anything like that, just paving straight on clay, that's probably going to be closer to a 15-year. Our roadways that we're designing today, hopefully those are going to be closer to that 25 years. And then we also do wear course placement. And so that's just performed in new developments after most of the homes in that area have been built. So this is what it looks like, crack sealing. You've probably seen this done around town. But since 2017, we average about $80,000 per year invested in this effort. And then seal coats, spend about $1.1 million per year. And like I mentioned earlier, this takes place about once every 8 years on an asphalt roadway. You can see we spray down the asphalt and then we drop these tiny little rocks on it. And Jeremy Gordon, he has my favorite statement when talking about seal coats. It's really like putting sunscreen on. So this is that we put sunscreen on to protect us from the sun. We also put seal coats down to protect the asphalt pavement from the sun. Mill and overlays, about $3.5 million per year we invest in this. And this takes place, again, depending on the type of road, but about every 12 to 25 years. So we go in there, we mill out a portion of the roadway, just the top, typically 1 to 2 inches, and then we put on a new surface. And wear course is very similar to a mill and overlay, but really designated for that new development area. Spent about $1.5 million per year on that since 2017. So here are the results. Really, I want you to focus on that rightmost column or 2 columns of all classifications. So you can see in our previous survey, all asphalt roadways had a score of 80.58. And this survey, they have an 80.5. So very, very small drop in condition index. And so what I would say that means is that the strategies, the timelines, the amount of money that we're investing in our asphalt roadways are appropriate, and we are maintaining that system where we want to maintain it. So now let's talk about concrete roadways. So we do spot repairs. These are usually just a minor 1 or 2 panel throughout town. Maybe we have a panel that, maybe we have a heave from the heat in the summer. We'll go in and address that little area all throughout town. So, and then we also do concrete pavement rehab projects, and these are much more comprehensive. This year, we're doing one on 13th Avenue from 38th to 28th Street. Last year, we did 28th to 21st. But you've also maybe have seen the projects we've done on 25th Street and 42nd Street the last few years as well. Another strategy we'll take in concrete as kind of just a stopgap towards the end of that life is an asphalt overlay. And like Kevin mentioned later, that's what we call a composite pavement. So here's an example of a location where we do a concrete spot repair. You can see there was a little area that failed. Public Works likely went in there, took it out, just filled it in with asphalt, and then we programmed that area as part of a project to go in and kind of make that permanent fix. So we've spent just short of $400,000 per year doing that type of improvement. And then concrete pavement rehab, whole lot of different things that we do in here. So we'll do partial depth repairs, and I'll have some images for these. So we do some partial depth repairs, full depth repairs, and then we also upgrade ADA ramps, and then a lot of times we'll diamond grind the surface. So since 2017, we've spent about a little over $2 million per year on those types of programs. So here's a partial depth repair. Contractor just jackhammers out kind of the surface of the concrete and puts a new surface on it to just address a very small area typically. When we can't do a strategy like that, it's usually a full depth repair. So the contractor is removing full panels. And you can see from this image on the left, sometimes that requires more work to be done as well. So taking out curb and gutter and replacing that. Sometimes it's sidewalk behind there, or in this example, colored stamped concrete behind the curb and gutter. And then the contractor will dowel into that concrete, tie into it, put rebar in, and then ultimately pour that concrete back in. As part of those projects and as part of mill and overlay projects as well, we update ADA ramps throughout. So you can see the image on the left. That was the existing condition, does not meet ADA requirements. And so the contractor goes through working with our crew out on job sites to ensure that we are meeting ADA standards for slope, truncated domes being put in, and all those things. And then a lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, so a lot of what we're doing on these projects is addressing the distresses or failures in the pavement, and it doesn't necessarily address the ride. So diamond grinding does address the ride on a concrete pavement. So we'll do a lot of these rehab strategies, and then we'll grind the pavement smooth and provides a really nice driving surface for our public. So here's just some examples of what that looks like before or after. 13th Avenue South, we had a lot of intersection failures from a project that we did about 20 years ago, used what was called high early concrete. What it meant is that the concrete got hard really fast and the public was able to drive on it very quickly, but what we found is it failed prematurely. So now we're in there replacing those things, so you can see the before and after here. Again, 42nd Street, you can see a number of panels here that were cracked, creating some potholes and certainly some annoyance for the public probably. And so we go in and take out those panels, and then you can also see the texture is a little bit different on this picture on the right, and that's because that diamond grinding was done to smooth it all out afterwards. So again, if we focus on those columns on the right, you can see that our previous survey had a PCI score for our concrete pavement of 86.9, and unfortunately that has dropped quite a bit to 79.93. So our takeaways from that is that we ultimately need to do more on our concrete roadways. So in 2022, as part of that project on 13th Avenue, we're addressing about 50,000 square yards of concrete pavement. Really looking at what our network is and the age of it, of our roadways coming into that probably about 20-year range. We should probably be doing about twice that amount. Another thing that we think we should be doing is formalizing a program for rehabbing those concrete pavements, and probably look at timelines of addressing them around year 20 and then again around year 35 to try to extend the life of those pavements. So I just want to talk a little bit about how our concrete network has grown and the types of pavements that we're going to have to address. And so, if you look back 20 years at all the pavement that was built around 20 years ago, so 2001, 2002, 2003, right, there's quite a bit of pavement in that age range that should be addressed, this year, next year. Unfortunately, we haven't been keeping up with all that. And so you can see that there's quite a bit of pavement that started before that. So again, this year we're addressing about 50,000 square yards. So if we want to pick a category of, or a strategy of every 20 years, we're doing a rehab project on concrete. If you take 1993, we installed nearly 200,000 square yards of pavement that year. 20 years after that, in 2013, we should have been addressing nearly 200,000 square yards of pavement. So with that, our network is aging. Right. So 73% of our pavement in our concrete pavement is 25 years or newer. And again, there's that overwhelming amount of network that we need to address and capture and preserve before it fails even more. So Kevin had kind of shown earlier in the presentation the two separate surveys. This is just highlighting what has happened in all those different categories. So total, all of our streets have fallen by about 3.82 points in that 4-year time frame. You can see some categories have fallen more than others, and some have increased a little bit as well. Just briefly want to talk about funding. So you can see on an annual basis, it changes a little bit, but on average in the last 6 years, we've spent about 70% of our overall budget in pavement management on our asphalt roadways, and only about 30% on our concrete. And just a reminder, nearly about 55% of our network is asphalt. You would expect that we should be investing about the same amount of money between the two on an annual basis. So how do we move forward? Really what we want to convey to you guys today is that, we've identified a challenge that we need to address, right? So now we need to find a solution before this becomes a bigger issue. And so what we're considering is the issuance of an RFP for a pavement management master plan. And so what we would look at doing through that, we'd analyze the current pavement management program, and we'd look at recommended funding levels that would align with a potential future pavement management policy. So we'd also look at reviewing and recommending pavement preservation strategies, see if there's things that we are not currently utilizing, seeing if we should modify the PCI ranges where we implement some of our strategies, and see if that could save us money in the long run. We'd also review the life cycle costs for asphalt and concrete pavement, and that might potentially change what we typically select for pavement decisions. So commonly we are installing concrete pavement on arterial roadways. Commonly we are installing asphalt pavement on locals and collectors. Maybe we look at that life cycle cost and that changes because of that. And then we'd also take a look at our asphalt and concrete pavement designs. We think we have very good mixed designs that we're currently using. There's some of the things that we could do, maybe the use of more geogrids or different geotextile fabrics, additional gravel, less pavement thickness, all those types of things. Try to understand whether that could save us money today and in the long run. And then ultimately, what we'd look at maybe doing after that study would be considering a pavement management policy. And so many cities have this, and what their goal is to maintain their PCI at or above their current levels. And they try to maintain a backlog at a certain percentage or under a certain percentage. And of course, all this would be done with the expectation that it would align with the public's expectations of where they expect our pavement score to be. And with that, no, it's a lot of information. Happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Mr. Chair, I have a few questions. First of all, one of the first slides where it showed the small numbers that have complete failure, if you could pull that slide up again? Because my question is, can we address those? There was a couple of the small areas where there was like complete. That's one of my questions. And then maybe while you're looking up that, it'd be kind of interesting to know what are we spending now per year with the current program? Obviously, what will hypothetically this new program cost And I think that would help us too. I think for all of us, we support maintaining our investment, but to know how much this is going to cost is a good question. Okay, that's the first slide. Thank you very much. And I guess my question is, how much, I believe we should obviously address that immediately. How much would it cost? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So what I'd say is, and as Kevin kind of mentioned, this was really focused on pavement preservation. So what can we do to maintain our existing? We still have a separate program, which is to recon those roadways that have failed. And so we as a city likely can't afford to do all of them on an annual basis. And so we will always likely have some amount of backlog. So all the research I've done, less than 10% should be the goal. And so we're at about 4.5% right now, which is pretty manageable. So again, pavement preservation is not worst to first, right? We're looking at those target ranges of when we want to capture a roadway. Maybe it's from a PCI score from 60 to 80 to do a mill and overlay, right? And then ultimately some of those roadways are going to fall through and they're going to get into our backlog and they'll have to be reconstructed. And so we do have, 32nd Avenue is a perfect example of a project that we're doing to reconstruct. Likewise this year on 7th Avenue, 3rd Avenue, and 21st Street South as well. And to answer your other question, Commissioner Pepcorn, currently in pavement preservation, we're spending on average just short of $9 million per year. And to understand how much more might have to be invested, that's again one of those things that we'd be looking at through an RFP process.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just add one more? So what is the RFP? What, are you going to set a number for that? What you anticipate the cost? I guess that's my next one. Thank you.
So just for clarification, a cost for the RFP or a cost to invest into pavement preservation?
Both. I think I'd be curious to know. I obviously I support doing an RFP, but what is your ballpark? Thank you.
That's a really good question. My gut says it's probably a couple $100,000. It depends on what we all look at analyzing throughout that.
Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. You know, this is a lot to process, and we could spend a lot of time just on some of these particular topics. An overview question I have is the funding streams. You know, when you have new projects and upgrading projects and improving projects and various surfaces and materials and various phases and times, earlier on a project might be 100% specials. Later on it might be, I'm really missing that funding stream. You know, when you have 50% of your homes are in neighborhoods or your town is in neighborhoods with neighborhood streets and how that's funded up front and how that's funded later on and how much of it's through specials, how much of it's through generals. I'm just really missing that picture here. I think the funding stream is critical to every level of these developments. And I don't know if it'd be nice to have that incorporated in. So as projects in different times and phases of them, we see, well, at this point, this is where it's funded. Over here, this is where it's funded. And then it might raise the questions of, well, if you have a house that's a neighborhood that's on the market or on the tax rolls for 90 years, are we using those general funds and anticipating that we will be doing upgrades, or is it always specials? I just think this topic's a big one as to how things are paid for and how we can connect that funding topic to these levels of what you're providing, Tom.
Yeah, I completely understand. So we currently use for our pavement preservation, special assessments and sales tax is typically what's used. Last year when we had an infusion of $2.5 million of prairie dog funds, we also used that in our pavement preservation program. So it really depends on the type of work, like you said. So a wear course project is part of new development. It's 100% special assessed by our infrastructure funding policy. If we get into a mill and overlay project, by policy, that's 50% special assessed, 50% city funded. If we get into a concrete rehab project like we're doing on 13th Avenue, that follows, again, our infrastructure funding policy. And I believe these numbers are about right. About 80% of that is city fund and about 20% is special assessed. But then if we went out for RFP service or went out through an RFP, and if we were to quantify what we think the necessary investment would need to be in our pavement preservation program, we would also look at how would the city want to fund that, right? So would that be an update to the infrastructure funding policy to change the proportions, or would that be through some other thing, right? So would that be a general fund obligation through the mill levy? Would that be a potential increase in sales tax? Would that be, that all sorts of options? And those are the types of things we would also be looking to likely recommend through that process.
The state legislative body, John, has a street utility tax that they passed last year. So in theory, you could pass the street utility tax, which is basically $20 a month, of $240 a year, and that would be for the whole city to help address this as well. We've chosen not to do that, but that is an option as well.
So that's really, I think we could really look further into that bigger picture of the funding side of all of these different aspects and policies, because there's policy decisions that will be implied in that. And that's kind of where I'm at a loss here is I see this, I see what you're providing us, but the other end of that teeter-totter is the funding and the variations and options and alternatives for funding and policies implied in funding. So that's just a general overview. Tom, another question, we've touched on this before, but well, today we had a really major rain event. And when there's rain to the level we had today, it has no place to go, the water. And so there's discussions out there about porous surfaces. I don't know if that, but I don't know where technology is leaving. But so that when you have a major rain event, the water goes down in rather than off and over. There's discussions about solar surfaces. Where do you see some of that going for future technologies for all of this surface covering that we have in our, because it's an issue on a whole nother front. Where's the water go?
So no pun intended, but when we start talking about stormwater, I get out of my depth pretty quickly. But so one thing I'll say is that, yes, there are many parts of this country that use, pervious pavements to retain and dissipate water that way. Our tight soils, right, our tight clays somewhat limit us in our ability with that. And so usually what has happened in this type of the country with our types of soils is retention under the roadways. The issue with that is it's very expensive, right? And so again, we could go out through an RFP and look at those types of things as well, right? But to Commissioner Pepcorn's question earlier, if we want to look at more of those things, it just expands the scope of that RFP and what we might have to pay for that.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a quick question? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Pepcorn.
So can I ask, do you evaluate, obviously, I follow that where you use cement, but with oil prices being so high, I can recall at the Fargo Dome, we chose to use cement parking lots just because the oil prices were so high. They were actually pretty competitive. Do you evaluate that every so often?
We do. So I would say at least, so I've been with the city about 7 years and I've done probably a life cycle cost analysis at least 3 different times of just looking at where our prices are for asphalt or concrete. And we really are pretty consistent with where that market is, that they do typically kind of wash out in the end. One of the reasons why we have typically used concrete for our arterials, one is they get a lot more truck traffic. We can help with keep them open when we're in spring load restrictions by having them concrete pavement. But then we touch them with our maintenance preservation less often. So the time frame between those pavement preservation strategies is a greater length of time on concrete. It's more impactful when we're there, but that's one of the reasons why we kind of pick those strategies on that type of pavement on.
So, Mr. Chair, just real quick, but like this year with oil over $100 a barrel, that's going to tell you asphalt prices are going to be quite a bit higher than they have been. So does that make it is it fairly close or is it not close?
The issue, it is still fairly close. The issue is that cement prices are also up and steel prices are also up. So again, concrete prices are up as well as asphalt this year.
Ben Dow, I just wanted you to address one of the questions John had, is when we have stormwater, we're actually designed to store some of the water on the street because your capacity to get into your storm sewer would be overwhelmed. On Osgood right now, you have an extra pump out there. Can you just explain that to John a little bit?
Well, of course, the street is always our backup, but in order to design to handle a rain event like we had today, the cost would not be attainable. I mean, you'd have such big pipes, such amount of storage you'd need to handle a rain event like we had today, that you just couldn't afford it. So what we end up doing is putting some of the water on the street. And our engineers do a great job of designing for what we want to be at. But again, an inch of rain in an hour is just not something we can deal with. I can also talk a little bit about permeable pavements. Our freeze thaws really raise havoc with those. One thing you want is to keep the moisture away from your undersurface of your pavement in our frost region. And so that is the number one way a pothole is formed, is when that moisture gets under your pavement and freezes and expands. And then then it thaws out, and then you see that water decrease in size and go away, and then you have a gap, and that's how a pothole is formed. So that is one of the reasons we like to stay away from it in our region.
Nathan, you had something to say as well?
So to further address the storm sewer capacity question, we design our storm sewer in the residential areas to handle roughly a 2-year flow, which is about 2.5 inches of rain over a course of 24 hours, not an inch within an hour. And then our arterials are designed to a 5-year capacity. So Ben is right, though, that, kind of the standard across the nation is to try and design for more of a 10-year rainfall event. But with how flat we are within the valley here, it just is not feasible in order to construct to that level of capacity in the storm sewer. Our costs would go up rather significantly, where it become unaffordable. So another aspect, though, we design as well is we know we can't design for that 100-year rainfall, but we try to design in such a manner that if we do get that 100-year rainfall, which is 6.5 inches over 24 hours, so a lot of rain, but we try to make sure that our homes are elevated sufficient enough that we know water will be in the streets on those events, but they will not be going into any structures as well.
Thank you.
John's at ground level now. He moved to a new place, so he's
I see.
a little bit more attached
I'm
to the
closer
water.
to the ground.
A little bit worried about it.
Bear with me as I kind of think out loud with you as I'm talking and asking, but, Commissioner Pepcorn's mentioning of oil costs and your mentioning of steel costs, and we all know concrete costs are going up, and I believe gravel costs are going up also. So that's the one whole element, one big part of all these discussions in longevity and wear and all that. The other aspect of it is the new world we're in as far as carbon footprints and carbon impacts and the green future. What's the greenest? What's the best for the future? What has the least carbon input into creating the products we use, and then ongoing after that, which has the best impact to the planet? And so to me, that's another, if you're going to go in RFP, I'd like us to not jump past those knowledge bases that would be valuable to us in the future we're looking at now immediately with regard to reducing our carbon footprint and tracking it, knowing the difference. If we do this, it's this impact. If we do this, it's this impact. If we do this, we reduce the impact. If we go over here, we you know what I mean? I think that'd be really good information to add into our studies as we're going forward if you're doing an RFP.
Sure. So just a comment, I did a webinar on some of this stuff, and the industry is responding to some of these things. Like cement now, they're using more limestone in it, so they're not using all of the old ingredients. So they're going to be a little tweak to the concrete mixes this summer. It's a little bit more green. It's not, it's moving the needle, but we haven't experienced it yet, so we don't know what to expect. But that was something that I learned about over the winter time, was the limestone cement that they're going to start using. So the industry is responding as well.
And then, John, we were talking about Sioux Falls concrete. One of the issues they have is their salt mix deteriorates the concrete more. So Ben is very careful about how much salt we put on here and how that impacts. A little different climate in Sioux Falls, but their cement deteriorates at a faster rate because of salt usage. And I wouldn't know what Minneapolis, it seems they use a lot of salt down in that area. But those little nuances are always, what is the environmental impact of what Ben puts on the roads? We're very cognitive of that and watch what we do.
Mr. Chair, part of that, the salt also ends up going into the river. So that's not healthy for fish and plants and all those kinds of things. So that's another thing to be aware of. Thank you.
Mr. Strand.
One little anecdotal sharing. There's a town in North Dakota named Concrete. It's up by mountain in Edinburgh and, Gardner, Walhalla area. They had a railroad there. I think the first railroad in the state was to serve Concrete, North Dakota, which was a concrete mining little community, or however we should, as a state, we should maybe look at that resource here and maybe go tap it again, see if it's still there and see if we can get concrete to us and to others from up there. I'm not sure what's there, but it's in our history.
Thank you, John. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I learn something new every time I come here. That was something I never knew. So can I ask you, so did they produce different things there and then they shipped them all over the place?
I believe they just trafficked the raw material.
Oh, that's cool.
We got Barry in the room. Maybe he'll look it up and put it in the forum for us. So, any other questions or discussions? Excellent presentation. You guys do a lot of work on this, I know, but it alerts us to where we go forward. And I'm assuming the two commissioners here and myself would like an RFP to kind of capture some of the questions that were asked today, but long-term what we have to do. John, the other thing I want to make you aware of in sales tax right now, which goes to streets, 44% is made up by people who do not live in Fargo. So the better we do retail-wise or better doing sales, it helps the consumers or the taxpayers in the city of Fargo not pay as much. So that's kind of a benefit we've had. So very good.